Well, we continue working through our series on John's writings, and we're going to work all the way through 1 John. This is expositional, and then I'll be mentioning things from Revelation, from Gospel of John. I won't go verse by verse through those books. But I do want to take a moment periodically to just remind us of the context of John's writings. He's writing to churches in Asia Minor that have a strong Jewish believer presence, who, of course, the Jewish Christians were ultimately rejected by the Jewish nation. And then in 70 AD, the Jewish nation was destroyed by Rome. And so these people are refugees. They're in exile for both religious reasons and then just political reasons with the destruction of their nation. And a significant number of them, including John, and he would have taken Jesus' mother Mary with him, had migrated up to Asia Minor, where John served in his old age as the pastor of the church at Ephesus, from where he's likely writing 1 John. Later on, he gets exiled to Patmos, and he writes the book of Revelation. So these people that are reading these letters that were directly written to them have gone through a lot of loss and a lot of estrangement from their family, from their country. Their country went extremely nationalistic, extremely defiant of the global power of Rome, and assumed God would bail them out, and they got beat down. There's actually a lot of parallels with things that are going on in our society today. And here we are, hopefully, trying to be like this community of the Apostle John, and trying to figure out how to stay a community and stay faithful and measure all these things. And in our context, there's a lot that's really challenging, not just with COVID. Hopefully, in 6 or 9 months, we're turning the corner on that, hopefully. But there's a lot going on in our bigger culture that Grace Bible Church can't fix, just like John's community couldn't fix. They just had to try to figure out how to band together and be faithful in it. There's a lot of information out there, but one source I looked at expects that about 40 million of millennials and Generation Z, and whatever comes next, will leave Christianity before 2050. 40 million. And they're not leaving because the evidences of the faith have suddenly changed. The evidences are still there. We've gotten so caught up in more subjective theories of life, what you could call higher criticism, that we're bypassing what scholars like to call lower criticism, because that's the boring stuff. But the lower criticism is actually the evidence, the manuscripts, the testimonies, that we all need to do something with, but everybody's so caught up in their higher criticism and their higher theories, and then you make the evidence fit your theory. And it's a huge problem. And it's becoming a bigger problem even in the church, where the church loses its prophetic voice because we want this theory to prevail rather than this theory, even politically, whether it's Trumpism or anything but Trumpism. We get so caught up in our preferred theory that we're not really looking at the evidence and calling out departures from the way of Christ, from whatever theory it comes from. In other words, the lower criticism is actually the evidence. And it's the church's job to have a prophetic role and stand on the truth and the evidence. Even if, like John's community, we're considered not patriotic enough, or nationalistic enough, or too globalist, or whatever. John's community, like Jesus himself, eventually just started getting hit on every side because they were just trying to stand for the truth. And if we're not willing to have the courage to just do that, our millennials and Generation Z aren't falling away because the evidence has changed. They're falling away because we spend too much time trying to market ourselves to the latest trend that will appeal, instead of challenging people to say, look at the evidence, step out in faith, take a stand. That's what the church's message has always been, when it stays true to its task. That doesn't mean you don't speak to social issues or changing cultures or things like that. But it's really about taking a stand on the rock that is Christ. no matter what goes on around us, because darkness is gathering energy. And it can only be defeated by light. We need courage and conviction. Those aren't trendy. They're not new. But they are what win the day for the battle of faith. So that's what we talked about last week in the digital worship was we need to distinguish knowing love from loving knowledge. We get caught up in our theories, and that's easy, and we can just not have to deal with messy people, and just if you don't line up with my theory, you're the problem. We need to ask the right questions, and then we need to test the spirits. And testing the spirits is what I really wanted to focus on today as we talk about being authentic souls in an increasingly apostate church. Apostate just means falling away. And it's not new. John's dealing with it. You always have that challenge, and ultimately John teaches us more about the Antichrist than anyone. But in this passage that we're looking at today, and in the earlier parts of 1 John, not the Antichrist, but any Antichrist is coming from within the community of faith, the professing community. They went out from us, but they were not of us. It's the church that needs to get its act together and take a stand on the truth. And it's the Antichrist that come from within the professing church. That is the biggest challenge for us. So we take a step back and look at our culture, and we see predictions of 35 to 40 million walking away from the faith in America. In parts of Africa and Asia and other parts of the world, the faith is exploding. But where we are and where we're called to serve, we're facing some really, really big challenges. But see, it's not just the falling away from the faith as we talk about apostate, standing away. I just saw a study, self-harm amongst our teenagers. Always a challenge. I've dealt with it ever since I've been in the pastorate. People come in and say, my daughter's cutting herself, or the youth telling you, and then trying to negotiate that with the parents and get that intervention done. It's doubled in the last 6 years. Not just the last year with the pandemic. I'm sure that's multiplied it too. But it's doubled in the last 6 years. Self-harm. People actually damaging themselves intentionally. There's a lot that goes on there where they basically exchange physical pain for emotional relief, because the injury to the body creates an adrenaline dump, which creates an emotional sense of, I don't feel so bad, but it's very addictive and very destructive, and it keeps going downhill. So 40 million departing the faith. Self-harm, doubling. I don't think things are trending in the right direction. Authentic souls in an apostate church. And remember, John was dealing with it in his day. It's a tough passage, but we need to start with what was already mentioned last week, testing the Spirit. So I have this for you, and I've shared this before in Faith Facts back when we had those things. And yeah, that's nothing new that if you've been part of this community, you might have seen something like this before. But we talk about things trending in the right direction. John has a very simple way in his letter of talking about acts that happen, like someone might one time self-harm, and they'd be like, okay, I really need to get help, I need to seek an intervention, versus a pattern of self-harming. And that's how John talks, and as we go a little bit more through 1 John, we'll see that delineation in his writings, where, for example, he'll say everybody sins, but if you're continuing in sin, if it's a pattern, that's deeply concerning as a child of the light. And it doesn't always come out on a surface level reading, but as we get through some of these verses, we'll unpack that more deeply. Just kind of wanted to put this out there for you today of how we end up in bondage. And we can go down that slope, but by God's grace and his Holy Spirit and the truth of his word and the community of believers, we can also go up. We're trying to figure out which way we're trending. So everybody has like an impulse. A lot of times we're not even aware of them. We might say, oh, in my gut. If you're enough aware of what you're feeling in your body, you might actually recognize that. But what we call our logic and our analysis, our thoughts and our choices, for every one cognitive conscious thought that you put out there, your brain's already gotten 9 singles from your body and your gut. Okay, so we're getting hit with stuff that we're not that consciously aware of, and we can't keep up with it. And if we start to sense it, we may double down and try, and then you get the whirling mind and the inability to rest, and which, hey, in the pandemic, a lot of us are struggling with anxiety. I'm struggling with it more. You get the whirling mind and difficulty resting. But really, it's these impulses, intuitions that hit you, and then you have emotions and thoughts. See, once you have the emotion or the thought, you have a choice to make. Because now you are consciously aware of it. Depending on what choice you make, you form habits. And if the habits are negative, they take away your freedom. You get stuck in a loop. It doesn't matter what the habit is. It could be obviously wrong, but so many times it's not obviously wrong. It's not what you're doing. It's why you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing what you're doing. And it could be negative. I think the Apostle Paul said, I could have the faith to move mountains, but if I don't have love, it's not positive. It doesn't amount to anything. I could have knowledge and research everything to penetrate all mysteries, but if I'm not loving, what good is that? Well, there's nothing wrong with moving mountains or having knowledge, but why and how? Are you coming into bondage? And if you get far enough down that bondage road, then you really do start getting some toxic stuff going on and even demonization. And John comes in and says, you need to test the spirits because that is a challenge. And as you see yourself in this culture and the things that are going on and in our world and all the darkness that's growing, it's easy to just want to retreat. Except that's not why the church is here. We're here, and I heard one pastor say it this way, to engage so that we can deeply actually encounter people and empower them. Engage, encounter, empower. And we need to be doing that in every field. And as you genuinely engage any field, I don't care if it's Christian academia, Phil. What do we say? Well, that's a good field. Yes, it's a good field. And a bad one. Or it's in the business place. Or a homeschooling parent. Or it doesn't matter what it is. Whatever your calling is, your vocation, you are there to engage people. And as you engage people, then you're going to start to encounter, as you build relationship, different things. And then you're trying to empower people in a positive way. My own journey through martial arts and self-defense, you run into some pretty bad belief systems. And it'd be easy. The simple thing that we want to do is to be black and white. I'm not doing martial arts. Well, then you have the example of Paul, where he goes into Athens. And see, it doesn't matter. It could be music. It can be the arts. It can be movies. It can be any field. And as soon as we run into something toxic, there's part of us that just wants to separate. Black and white, don't get involved at all. You can only listen to Christian music. You can only watch Christian movies, whatever. But that's not what Paul did in Athens. Paul went into Athens and he saw the idols. And guess what? He was provoked in his spirit. That's what it says. It was upsetting to him and he was even angry. But he breathed through it. He practiced the fruit of the Spirit of self-control. He walked through Athens. He engaged the culture. He saw an altar to an unknown God. That gave him a chance to have a deeper encounter and to empower people with the hope of the gospel in that idolatrous mess. And even quotes from a pagan hymn to Zeus. We say it often, in him we live and move and have our being, about God. But in the human process of how we got that truth, it came through a hymn to Zeus. Not the Hebrew prophets. A hymn to Zeus that Paul engaged, encountered, and then used it to empower a truth about God. Paul then writes, you who abhor idols to the Hebrew people, because they were getting too zealous and too separatist. You who abhor idols, Paul abhorred idols. You see that in Athens. Do you rob temples? Plural. To the Hebrew people, there was only one legitimate temple. And so, rob can be blaspheme, do violence to. So you who abhor false religion, do you attack the religious impulse and do violence to it? He didn't do that in Athens. He abhorred the idols, but he affirmed their religious impulse. That's being a child of the light in a dark world. Because for the dark to get light, it has to encounter the light. You engage, you encounter, and you empower. And that's what John's community is trying to do. That's what he's trying to do. The Gospel of John is the most evangelistic of all the Gospels, the one that most tries to encounter unbelievers and draw them into the faith. He's doing all that. That's from our Thursday Pastoral Connect, to say that we're in a spiritual war. And I'm not going to take time through that. Just go listen to the Pastoral Connect. But there's this radical claim in it. We are from God. Those who are from God listen to us. Those who are not from God don't listen to us. That's a radical claim. And that's John talking about we, the eyewitnesses. Our eyes saw him, our hands touched him. You and I have inherited that tradition. We're not eyewitnesses. You probably don't want to go down that road of saying, well, if you listen to me, then you have God, and if you don't listen to me, you don't. That's probably a little cocky. We're not apostles. We're not eyewitnesses. But we have inherited their teaching, and it's preserved for us. And we use that teaching to, as we've already talked about, test the spirits. And when you try to test the spirits, then you have to define spirit. Because we think, oh, well, demon and angel, those are spirits. Yes. But even the scriptures use spirit more broadly than that. For example, John says in the book of Revelation, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So the testimony of Jesus is like the engine or the energy that drives prophecy. It was all pointing to him. Hosea says, a spirit of prostitution leads my people astray, spiritual prostitution. Look, all of us, if we're honest, cheat on God at times. But do we have a spirit of adultery? See, that's a problem. A spirit of adultery is, oh, I chase every high that's out there, and when they all wear out, I guess I could go back to God until I get my high and my fix, and then I wander off again, and I do it 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 again. And it's just a pattern in my life. And John's saying, look, as we wrestle with this thing called faith, even while the apostles, or at least John, was still alive, all the other apostles might have been dead by the time he's writing this. We don't really know for sure. But as that apostolic community is still around, and John's writing this, there's already these false spirits that are coming into the church and through the church and leading people that were in the church astray. And so John says you have to test that. You have to kind of get into the sense of what's the energy behind this and what direction is it taking me in? Is this taking me toward God, toward the community of God? If I walk in light as he's in light, I fellowship with one another? Or is it taking me away from the community of God? Okay, so something like COVID is not anybody's fault. We don't need to embrace all these human conspiracy theories. But COVID's a demonic tool if we don't process it well. Because it's put this situation in place that needs to be there that can take us away from the community of God. And that's not a good spirit. And we have to get better at talking that way. The charismatics are onto something when they might go a little off the deep end sometimes. I sense a spirit of anger in you. I said, yes. Everybody gets angry. But even just with the lockdowns, a lot of us are really starting to seethe. We need to be testing the spirits. Test means, is this authentic? Is this authentic? Is it healthy? Is it good? And we're told to check that out because every prophet, every mouthpiece, everything I say, my verbal and nonverbal communication, usually has a spirit behind it. Some type of energy, some type of influence, some type of pattern. And which way am I going? And hey, we all go down that slide and we all go back up it. The key is just testing it. What direction am I going in? And how do I go the right way? And a lot of it has to do with this thing we call church. We have to hang in there. We have to take a stand for Jesus. Shelley already read the passage. But here, John talks about the spirit of Antichrist. And that the spirit of Antichrist is already in the world, even when John was speaking. And his primary concern with the community he's writing to, as I already mentioned, is it's coming from within the church community. This is not new to John. Peter and Paul say similar things. So that's what I call your three big guns of our New Testament, as far as the writers. Because the Gospel of Mark is probably the Gospel of Peter. I don't know if you're aware of that, but Mark apparently wrote the Gospel of Mark while he was listening to Peter's sermons. So the Gospel of Mark, 1st and 2nd Peter, John's writings, Paul's writings, that's a huge part of our New Testament. And all three of them speak to the community of God and say the biggest concern is not the atheist out there. It's that you're going to let unhealthy things get in you, even while you're in the community of faith, and be drawn away. As he talks about this spirit that has gone out into the world, it's almost like John is saying, that genie is out of the bottle, Pandora's box has been opened, and it's not going back in until Jesus comes. He's saying, you'll run into individual antichrist, and an antichrist in your life is anything that takes the place of Jesus. So there's just individual occurrences. I mean, my dog could take the place of Jesus. Lucy, maybe, right? It can happen. Okay. But then in this chapter, John's talking about that spirit of Antichrist, and when he says it's gone out into the world, he's saying it's gone out and it's out, and it has enduring results already in John's day. So what do you do about that besides be discerning? Well, the short answer is you keep truly loving and loving truly. A little bit of a play on words there. But when we talk about a loving spirit, it's not just your content, it's your tone. Our nonverbals and our tone are hitting people too. When Jesus winds up his public ministry, and John records this for us in John chapter 12, verse 46 through 50, Jesus says to the crowds, you see me, you've seen the Father, you've seen the one who sent me. So if you believe me, you believe the one who sent me. If you don't receive my word, I don't judge you. I'm not here to judge anybody. But there is a judge, the word I have spoken, because I say just what the Father tells me to say, just how he tells me to say it. Content and tone. Creates an energy or a spirit. And if you get far enough down that road, it might actually be a demonic spirit. We know it's often the Holy Spirit. Didn't that happen to Peter? I say you're the Christ. Oh, the energy by which you said that didn't come from you, Peter. No man is that smart or that pure. My Father did that for you. So when we talk about truly loving and loving truly, my point is to get that play on words where we like speak the truth in love, or literally truthing people in love. And it's relational. What's true for the most loving relationships of our life is true for our relationships in general. They become more loving when we, ourselves, are more loving. That doesn't automatically fix somebody else, but we start resonating with a different spirit. And by the way, that's the best chance you're going to have to change somebody else. It's not going to be you hammering them with your words if it's not done in a loving spirit. And the two things that make us loving, if I had to boil it down to two things that are really practical. Number one, connection. We are embodied people. We need presence. And Zoom's great, and we make the best of it. But we need to connect. And if the only way you can connect is Zoom, then we Zoom. Okay? But you can't let that intentionality to connect drift away. Connection is what allows empathy to happen. And the other thing, so there's connection, just show up. Show up and be present. The other is, it sounds simple, but it's huge, positive intent. I'm going to show up, and I'm going to be positive, and I'm going to try to influence people to go up that slope, not down that slope. Because I can show up and be negative, and I'm still glad you showed up. But we need to do both. It sounds so simple, but it's hard. To just take a stand for Jesus, take a stand for connecting. Even if you walk into an Athens and you're originally provoked by all the idols, but for Paul, it was like, I am here to connect, and if I can connect with these people, I'm here to influence them positively toward God. That's it. That's all we can control. So, practice. Practice doesn't make perfect in this life, but practice makes us better. Just in all your situations, show up and be positive. That doesn't mean you don't say hard things, but tone, spirit, managing ourselves, changing who we're resonating with, the spirit we're resonating with, is the best way we can help other people. This congregation has been amazing at persevering through a year-long pandemic. It goes beyond words that I can ever express. And we're not out of it yet. And we don't really know when we will be. It's a fight. And there's a lot more going on than just COVID. It's what it's doing to our spirits. Test the spirits. Test the spirits. Keep loving truly, intend to connect, intend to be a good influence. For Jesus. He's worth it. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this time.